Going on? I'm Patrick Jaguar with Cosmic Alchemist Astrology. So welcome to this video. Thanks for tuning in. So I want to get into a topic in this one that it goes up my ass sideways. I just find it annoying. Like I don't find it, distressing. The topic's not the bane of my existence, but it's just plain annoying. So this topic it's like, who are the true Israelites? And everybody has, well, not everybody, but so many groups have, and irrationally so, they have skin in this game. So, some people will tell you, oh, the Irish are the true Israelites. Oh, the sub-Saharan Africans are the true Israelites. And the Native Americans are the true Israelites. And it's like, it's something you couldn't possibly prove or disprove at this point. It's basically people have emotional agendas and they find hearsay and, and they conjecture a conclusion. And I get it. I definitely get it because, especially in the last 2,000 years, people are so disconnected from their ancestral spiritual traditions. And that's the thing I've been getting into for many years, ancestral spiritual traditions. Someone asked me, what's my spiritual tradition? For the most part, I'd say Norse paganism. Germanic paganism, Irish paganism to an extent, but yeah, definitely European paganism for sure. That's what's in my blood, and I think that's what we resonate with most. Now, any spiritual tradition, any ancestral spiritual tradition, as long as you're human, it's going to work. So it's like, well, yeah, you could be Northwestern European descent like I am, but if you want to get into, say, Yoruba spirituality, which is from West Africa, that tradition will totally work for you. Or, you might be from West Africa, but you might want to get into Chinese Taoism, which goes back into prehistory. And that'll work for you because you're human. Whatever the case is, if you are getting into an ancestral spiritual tradition that's outside of your, ethnic group, your racial group. Now, when I say ancestral spiritual traditions, I'm talking about traditions that have a root back into prehistory that, have been more or less unbroken. Definitely with the European paganism, they survived underground, but there is a bit of a disconnect. They didn't continue on as unbroken as, say, the Vedic culture, which turned into Hinduism, or even Taoism. But even within those cultures, they had great resets where everything that came before a certain point, leaders, imperial and religious leaders, tried to stamp what came before into the mud, kind of create a year zero. This definitely happened in China about 2,500 years ago when the Yellow Emperor Wang Di took control. There was a very different culture, and they tried to just format it as basically what you would call Han Chinese, but still, they have a pretty good link to prehistory. So when I talk about ancestral spiritual traditions, I'm talking about spiritual traditions that go back into prehistory. And they're not these newfangled book clubs like the biblical religions. So, yeah, this whole thing about the Israelites, really, I think these biblical religions and even Buddhism, to a degree, they're psyops to disconnect people from their ancestral spiritual traditions. Certainly Buddhism is not, it doesn't do this as extensively as Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. But, with the Buddhists, the Buddhists invading or coming as missionaries, basically invading from India, they tried to stamp out the Tibetan shamanism, and then they co-opted and appropriated it into Tibetan Buddhism. And this is why Tibetan Buddhism has a very is very markedly magical. It has this whole magical tradition that other forms of Buddhism don't have. It's because they co-opted and absorbed what was in Tibet already. But yeah, these biblical religions, particularly Christianity and Islam, which are evangelical, where Judaism is not, they're total psyops to disconnect people from their ancestral traditions. So it's like saying that Christianity is the heritage of Europe and the ancestral tradition of Europe. That's completely false. Europe had spirituality, spiritual traditions that did not wage global wars and that were not evangelical. Because evangelical religions, whenever they can get away with it, they kill people who don't want to accept them. That's how Christianity became the dominant religion in Europe. They sent out the Roman Empire, which became Christian, sent out missionaries with money to bribe the tribal chiefs, the tribal kings and queens, to adopt the religion. And the people were either coerced into it, or they just had such blind faith in their tribal leaders that they accepted it. And steps were taken too to basically alter the cultures, to basically get people to gaslight themselves about what their ancestral cultures really were, and to get them to speak new languages and, things like that. So yeah, and then there's this whole thing too about how Islam is like the religion of Africa, and then you've got like the Nation of Islam, and you've got the Temple of Moorish Studies, and Islam it's like Christianity. It's this like perverse desert religion, in my opinion, just like Christianity. It's an Arabian cult that wanted to build an empire in a trading bloc. It's just like Christianity. Basically, the bankers in Rome and in Constantinople, present-day Istanbul, they wanted to control trade at the western end of the Silk Road, and they wanted to basically muscle the people who we call the Vikings out of the shipping, because products coming down the Silk Road to the west, they'd arrive in the Caspian and Black Sea areas, and in the Norse, these Scandinavian pagans sailing these dragon ships would pick up the products, they'd sail them through Russia up the rivers to the Baltic Sea to Scandinavia, and then they would transport the goods to the Mediterranean and Western Europe. So these banks wanted to create a homogeneous bloc in the entirety of Europe to muscle them out of that. And that's why the Vikings started raiding the churches, because they were basically muscled out of a livelihood. So Islam, it had financial and commercial interests behind it too, and they wanted to create a trading bloc that was as large as possible. So you had these extremist evangelical missionaries come to Africa with Islam, and they basically got those people to gaslight themselves, and they forced that tradition on people in Africa when they needed to. So Islam is not African any more than Christianity is European. So yeah, just these cults in both places have popped up. And another thing too that these biblical religions do is they create supremacy. And I completely and staunchly believe that modern racial supremacy is completely born out of these biblical religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Because what happens, people get cut off from their ancestral traditions, and then every ethnic group is trying to be the best group in the eyes of gods, and the dominant one within the empire, which is that religion. So yeah, you want racial supremacy to go away? It's like, get back to ancestral spiritual traditions, because before these biblical religions, people didn't care what religion other people were. And they were like, they were not evangelists. They didn't want to go out and convert people because they were like, well, you're probably not going to understand my tribe's religion. I mean, you can participate and learn it if you want, but you're probably not going to understand it. So that's what we need to get back to, in my opinion. If you want to get rid of racism, that's how you do it. Go back to your ancestral roots. Academic, scientific atheism, that's just another form of, monotheism, Christianity, Islam. Same thing with different vocabulary. It's one empire, and people are going to still compete to be the dominant group within it. So, yeah, this whole thing, who are the true Israelites? It goes straight up my ass. Really, in my opinion, they're fictional stories that are loosely based on history. And all these titles in the Bible and the Quran, they're not personal names, they are titles, excuse me. So these patriarchs in these books, like Moses, for example, that's not a personal name, that's a title. There were pharaohs in Egypt. There were dozens of pharaohs, if not more, who had Moses at the end of their name. And that's the thing too, the whole racial supremacy thing comes in with Egypt, because people are like, the ancient Egyptians were strawberry blonde. No, they were black, and it's like back and forth. Oh, Genghis Khan was black. Oh no, the Ethiopians were, blonde haired and blue eyed. And there's all this shit going on. And it's like, well, if you want to get into like Egypt and Ethiopia, it was a mix because a lot of people were coming in, even in the archaeological record. Different people came into those areas. So it's like, if you wonder what complexion that, say, like the pharaohs and the ruling elite of Egypt had, well, it's like, well, what time period? Are you talking about when the Nubians are running the place? They were definitely dark. If you want to talk about the Hyksos those are the mummies they find that are like strawberry blonde, that are redheaded, extremely pale, redheaded, blue-eyed, green-eyed. So it's like, well, what period in Egypt are you talking about? And Ethiopia had all kinds of influxes of people. So yeah, this stuff is just, it's a silly argument. Who are the true Israelites? And you've had ridiculous shit like the British Israel movement to say like, oh, Jesus left Palestine and went to Britain. And then too, what is it? It's the Black Israelite. I can't remember. It's like the Black Hebrew Israelite movement. It was like that shooting in Jersey City. It was like people from that group were part of that. It's all nonsense. It's like, why the fuck? Another thing that goes up my ass sideways, why is it that Hebrew, Latin, and Arabic are like the only magical languages? That goes straight up my ass. I don't think there's really anything special about any of those languages. So that's my advice to people, is get back to your true ancestral spirituality. Now, like I said, a lot of people have been cut off from their ancestral spirituality. This is true of Europeans. This is true of sub-Saharan Africans. It's people everywhere in the world that these biblical religions went. Now, a lot of people, they like to complain till the cows come home about how, the man took their spiritual ancestral traditions away from them, but they don't want to do the work to find out what those are and to study them. So they're like, I guess I'll just do some Western Latin-based magic. I guess I'll just, get into the Hebrew alphabet and the this and that, or I'll, Arabic magic. It's like, well, if you are like Central Italian and Arab, or, Sephardic Jewish, those are your ancestral traditions. But if you're anyone else, you have a tradition out there that's waiting for you. I first heard this. I went to a powwow in Denver, Colorado. Powwow is it's a gathering of the American Indians. People think that term's offensive, and they like Native American, but you know, I've known a lot of natives who still they'll tell you, no, I'm an Indian. They're like, I don't like this Native American term because it's basically been promoted by a bunch of Caucasian, a bunch of white academics who think they can classify the whole world on their behalf, and they don't let people describe individual groups describe who they are. So anyway, at this powwow, an elder, American Indian, an elder Native gentleman, having a conversation, and he's like, well, this is a good tradition, but I'd recommend, find out what's the tradition that resonates most with your blood. Because there is European, shamanistic, indigenous spirituality, and it's probably going to come most alive for you. And yeah, it was good advice. So yeah, this whole, who are these true Israelites? It's ridiculous. It's so, and the arguments are so far-fetched and ridiculous. It's like, no, Solomon was blonde and freckly. No, King David was ebony. It's like, why would I fucking care? Why should anyone care? The Bible is called the greatest story ever told because it's exactly that. It's a story. You can find rabbis who will speak to you honestly, and they'll, you ask a question like, well, why do you have Abraham, Abraham, Jacob, and Isaac? And they're like, well, Catholics have Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Hindus have Brahma, Shiva, Vishnu. It's like we needed a Trinity too. The three powers are the three energy forces are a fact in nature. So, it's like the very learned rabbis, especially you meet ones that are like 30th generation rabbis or more. It's like they know this stuff and they're comfortable with it. They don't start clutching their pearls if you suggest that it's a mythology, that this biblical story is a mythology that's part of their spiritual tradition. So yeah, I find it annoying when people are arguing about, who are the true Israelites. It's like, if there were, they like diffused out into the world, into like Mesopotamia, Babylon, Egypt, Europe, Scythia, modern Ukraine, Russia, God knows where else. So yeah, I just find it silly. It's like Arabic, Hebrew, and Latin are not the only magical languages. And I think there are other languages that are much more magical. For me, definitely the runes. And even the guas of the I Ching, things like that. So yeah, I'm gonna wrap that up there. Food for thought, and have a good one. Talk to you later.